Hi everyone, this is Sherry Rice Smith for EFTforchristians.com. Remember always that if you have any medical or psychological issues, that EFT is not a substitute for taking care of that, and that you do indeed need to call your own personal physician and or your own personal psychologist. Today I want to go over a few studies that have been done in and around EFT. First, I want to talk about some of the bad news, and then I'll talk about some of the good news. We often hear, and it's in the news very, very frequently, about our U.S. vets, and there's still World War II and Korean and Nam vets around, of course, plus all the Iraqi wars, about how bad PTSD is. And I just want you to understand that, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a diagnosis from a psychologist. It worsens over time, and there are some actual changes that happen within the brain. The one in particular that I know about is the hippocampi shrinks, which just means that their memory tends to go. I think it's 25% smaller in people who have PTSD. PTSD is not just for soldiers. There's about 15 to 25% of all kids have PTSD, and that's just from abuse issues, that happen in their lives and during their early years. And of course, that gets carried through, and those triggers just keep happening and happening and happening, and it just worsens and worsens. One out of every 10 vets is all that completes PTSD treatment at VA centers, from what I understand. PTSD often increases the domestic violence within the household among their spouse and their children, and then though the spouse and the children end up with transferred PTSD. We have more vets in prison than just about anybody else. But with that all said, there's been some studies done around PTSD. And it was shown in a study in 2013 that was done by Church and Yount, I believe, that 6 sessions of EFT decreased a lot of the PTSD symptoms, like they were into subclinical levels in 86% of the vets that they tapped with. And they checked them again at 3 months and 6 months, and at 6 months, 80% of those changes, those positive changes, had still held. Some resource out there that you can look it up, and I can't give you the exact website other than it's BattleTap. It's an online course that was set up by some volunteers who do help with vets who have PTSD. You can look that up. They have an actual, you sign in, and there's some instructions on how to tap to lower those triggers and to keep them at bay and help that. Number 2, there was an ACE study done by Kaiser Permanente out in the West Coast a couple years ago. I think they had something like 17,000 participants, and what they were checking for, and they were older adults, like my age, older adults, they were checking to see how their childhood experiences impacted their health today, and they were astonished at the results. They had 10, I think there were 10 questions on the survey, and they were pretty bad questions, like, were your parents divorced? Did you ever see your mother? They weren't worded this way, but did you see your mother or a parent get beat up? Was there drug use in the house? Was somebody an alcoholic? Was somebody mental ill? Those types of things. Were you ever sexually assaulted? Were you ever physically or emotionally assaulted? And each question, there were 10 of them, each question got a point, and what they showed was the higher the ACE score, so in other words, how many more of those events you said indeed did happen, was the higher and the more at risk you were for chronic and physiological disease. So it was a pretty bad study, actually, and also it showed that the higher the score, you actually had more negative social consequences, which means you were kind of doomed to repeat some of the behavior. Maybe you had more divorces, or you were, had alcoholic tendencies. So it was an astonishing study to show that what goes on in childhood and that emotional and sensory input really does impact hugely our physical health. There were a couple other studies. I know that Dawson Church did another one with 216 healthcare workers, And what that showed is with 30 minutes of tapping, they decreased their physical pain by 68%. That's a pretty big statistic. There was another study he did. He wanted to check cortisol levels, and there's a kind of a long story about how he did that and how the results came out. But they did saliva tests before tapping, and then cortisol saliva test after tapping. And what that showed is an hour of tapping dropped cortisol levels 24%. That's huge. And that's why I often tell people, I just tap the tap. You know, I may be tapping in church. I can be sitting in the car and tap. If we're watching a movie on TV, I tap. I just sit and tap, because if I have trained my body to know what the tapping means. And if it drops my cortisol level, hey, I need my cortisol level down. I'm still dealing with some more of my own stuff. We all need our cortisol levels down. Because, you know, the phones keep ringing, and with political ads, and they make us upset, and this happens, and we need our cortisol levels down. In that 2013 study of the vets, they actually had a little side study going on, and that while they tapped that, but during those 6 sessions that they did with the vets for the PTSD, they found out that in that their pain levels also dropped 41%. So they dropped a lot of their own PTSD symptomology, but they also dropped their pain levels, because a lot of our vets are dealing with pain. You know, there's just results of, you know, being in battle, and you've been injured, or, you know, you're just, you know, you've fallen over things, et cetera, et cetera. There are over 100 studies now, or darn close to it, of EFT and how it's done. They've done studies on seizures. They've done some work around, we know people who are diabetic use it. We know we use it on just about anything. So I just wanted to point out a couple of them. You can go on, you know, to Google Scholar and look some more of these up. You can go on to EFTuniverse.com. They have a research page. They can look up some there. There's quite a few out there now, and it's starting to get to be pretty good and pretty interesting science. Okay, thanks a million for listening. Again, if I can answer any questions on a YouTube for you, if you have something specific, please feel free to email me at EFTforchristians.com. Grab a new copy of our new book, EFT for Christians, Tapping in God's Peace and Joy, just out on Amazon, or email me and buy one off my website, EFTforchristians.com, and I'll autograph and mail it to you as soon as I get my books in the mail. All right, take care. God bless you. Remember, Jesus loves you more than you can ever imagine.